To me, it seems that the Blumhouse trilogy, in its own way, is kind of just retreading old ground. The first film is their version of Halloween 1. Halloween Kills is their version of Halloween 2. And of course, the third entry is kind of like their version of Season of the Witch. And you can appreciate what they're trying to do in remaking or updating the mythology for a new time and a new generation and all that. And if it worked for you, that's great. But I think if we are going to just be repeating a lot of the old tropes, it can be done in a much better fashion. Here I present you Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, which is a very explicit remake of the Romero version from the 1970s. Now, not going to lie, the Romero version is a lot stronger, still holds the crown, but I was actually surprised going back to it recently that Snyder's version of Dawn is actually fairly strong, and it is very scary in a lot of places. It's also very, very funny and amusing because it's working with a script by James Gunn. And they did change quite a lot from the original screenplay, as far as I know, but nevertheless, it isn't as satirical or as hilarious as the Romero version, which is also very funny and very dark and very scary. It did retain a lot of the flavor of the original, but it went off and did its own thing. But what's really interesting in contrast to Halloween Ends is fans were just kind of puzzled because this didn't really have Michael Myers a lot in the story, and it's billed as a Michael Myers story. Now, again, you can do Michael Myers in many different ways, of course. You don't even need Michael in much of the film, right? Technically speaking, H2O did not have a lot of Michael in the entirety of the film, neither did the first film. So you can kind of have Michael be absent for a lot of the story, but when he shows up, he has to be very powerful. And I think Halloween Ends there kind of didn't give us enough of the powerful version of Michael Myers, at least to satisfy most of the fans. That's not the problem with Dawn of the Dead. These zombies are zombies in a zombie flick, and they are pretty vicious and terrifying, and they are very effective in coming at you and being a threat. So that part of it, is this a zombie film? Yes. Whereas with Halloween Ends, it's not clear we can classify it as a Michael Myers film, but Dawn of the Dead is a zombie film, and it is full on zombie. I still prefer the Romero version where the zombies walk slow and they're sort of like just creeping upon you. And what I like is that the paranoia of the first film is still being maintained, but it's being reworked and updated, I think, for the most part, pretty well. Although I do think some critics who didn't like Dawn of the Dead have kind of mischaracterized what Snyder was up to. They sort of took it at face value that he was endorsing a lot of the paranoia of the characters. Whereas I think he's kind of doing both. That, yes, we're kind of looking at them and sympathizing with them, but at the same time, we are recognizing even if the zombie apocalypse did not happen, these people would be pretty crazy onto themselves, and they already had kind of messed up lives. The zombie threat just kind of emphasized how crazy they are, but they already were on a very bad track and already had pretty itchy trigger fingers and just they were just waiting to kill one another and just really let out a lot of their frustration on other people. So tonally, as well as in terms of the satire, no, it's not as strong as the first one. But nevertheless, it worked within a range, which is still very impressive. Now, I can't force anyone to see the Snyder version. I recognize, and I agree with them that Romero is a kind of master. In terms of horror itself, Zach isn't quite up there, but I don't know. I'm pretty amazed how this doesn't get a lot of love and attention, even amongst Snyder fans, because it does feel very different. You do have a few of the trademark things like slow motion, but it's not as extreme as his other films. And I actually like that he used a lot of practical sets and a lot of practical effects. At certain points, you can definitely see weaknesses because, again, whatever else, he does work really hard with CGI to make it visually very precise and very powerful. And he has to work with a much smaller budget here. But even so, I thought it was overall a very decent entry. And in terms of its main thing, you won't be disappointed. This is a zombie film. It doesn't hide what it's trying to be. The first 20 minutes, it's very aggressive and very hard hitting. And a lot of people thought, including Romero, that it had a strong opening, but then it got progressively more weak as it went on. I disagree. There are still some pretty powerful moments scattered throughout the film, and I don't want to ruin it because there are a lot of surprises, a lot of twists, and the way they emerged, they were actually pretty cleverly done. I think people are a little bit too focused on the greatness of the first film. They're not giving the remakes their own due. And I agree that when you're remaking George Romero, you're in a tricky situation. You'll never be as great as the first one. I think Dawn of the Dead really tried to really just be very impressive and be very true to the source in its own way, even though they did, yes, no doubt about it, violate the zombie mythology because George Romero zombies, they don't run. They come at you very slowly, very methodically. And I do prefer that version because there's something a little bit more scary about that kind of version of a monster that just keeps slowly coming at you, and that's linked up to Michael Myers. That version is, in my eyes, much more scary than something that's going to come really fast at you at a very kinetic pace. I think in terms of Halloween Ends, they could have taken a lot of notes from Dawn of the Dead. If you are going to just update and remake a classic with your own little stylistic touches, I mean, again, even Zack Snyder, yes, he often respects the source material, but he changes a lot. Nevertheless, he still works within a range, and you never feel like he's just trying to outdo the source material. He's trying to do justice to the source material, whereas I think Halloween Ends is kind of trying to replace our memory of Season of the Witch with their version of Season of the Witch. And if that was the ambition, okay, I can't fault the ambition, but I think the execution could have been done a lot better. That they stayed within a range of what we expect from a Halloween film and still do something very artistic and very unique. But for whatever reason, they really wanted to go to a real extreme and have kind of polarized fans with their very extreme interpretation of Michael Myers. So we'll have to see over the long run whether it really worked for the fandom. With Dawn of the Dead as an example, you kind of could have done something much more moderate and still accomplished your goals. But that's me as a Snyder fan talking.